welcome viewers. Reverend Dr. J.W. Morrison, theologist, New South Wales, Australia. Bike day. And I just want to talk to you about covert emotional incest and the hatred that can come from it, the damage. One of the things that made me get away from the problems I was having with my last relationship was the fact that I was not a hateful person. There was things I didn't like, but they were usually resolvable. They were usually something you could resolve. But when it come to covert emotional incest, that was unresolvable. There was no resolve for that. You weren't going to be able to resolve it. And I had difficulty with that. I had trouble with that because it started to turn me into a narcissist. Covert emotional incest can turn you into a narcissist because you're dealing with, if it's triangulated, narcissists. Triangulation's an MPD definite sign if it's in the negative. If it's in the negative, it's a definite sign of narcissism. And that's something that you don't want. So I began to build hatred, I began to build resentment, bitterness, and my partner's coming over and I'm going, I can't love you. How can I love you the way that I'm supposed to? The way that I should be? And the problem being was she wasn't going to resolve the triangulation. Because it's hard. If it's a maternal bond, if it's got to do with a maternal bond and it's crushing the relationship, she's probably going to go with the maternal bond and try and maintain the relationship from the maternal connection perspective, but it won't hold because you begin to realize that you're just a third wheel in a secondary relationship for that person, as hard as they're trying, because their extra maternal bond has forced them into a position where they can't transition out of that and put themselves into a healthy relationship. They can't do that. Australian bush for your viewers. From the ocean to the country. When I was young, I used to surf in the morning and ride motorcycles in the arvo. At 57, I'm still doing it. I was doing that at the age of 18. So when your partner can't put boundaries around their children because they're hedged in by their covert emotional incest, the parentification and the surrogacy syndrome of their children, which is abuse and emotional molestation on their children and themselves, mainly the children, because the children underdevelop. They become too dependent on the parent. And this is probably part of the problem, the dependency on the parent. As an adult, and it takes away their innate ability to break away and make the mental, emotional muscle concept of their life to get somewhere. It breaks it down, it sabotages it, and that's psychologically crippling. That can cripple these people psychologically in terms of trying to get forward in life. And they don't. They stunt. They psychologically stunt. Now, in that stunting, there's a price. Everybody's paying a price for this relationship, a big price. And as a result of that price, there has to be a tax, there has to be a payback for what the relationship, the covert emotional incestual relationship, is costing. And the cost, the tax of the cost is, I will be committed. I'll remain committed to this covert emotional incest relationship. So when that breaks down, the contention, there's going to be contention, there's going to be confusion, there's going to be resentment, bitternesses, there's going to be chaos, conflict. All these things are going to happen. No matter what happens, all these things are going to happen. And then you've got a partner that's stuck in the middle of this split life. Now, in the meantime, you're in the background trying to work out, if you don't know what covert emotional incest is, beautiful. You're in the background trying to figure out what exactly is going on. And that's not fair, because if you don't know what covert emotional incest is, you're going to find yourself in all sorts of drama and trauma, because you'll be wondering where the deficit's coming from. Where's this problem coming from? And the deficit will be coming from the covert emotional incest. But you won't know that. You won't realize that, because you don't know what it is. So what happens is then you get put in a situation where, okay, well, am I just jealous of these people, or have I got a problem with these people and their issue? What they care about each other, and it's, Mum, can you butter my bread? Or, you know, I'll get it for you, darling. You know, these are adults. Now, there's a place for that, but there's also a place where that's unacceptable, where that's just not acceptable. And this is where the conflicts come from, because it's extra-maternal. You've heard of extramarital. Well, this is extra-maternal, but it's happening inside the domestic formation of the people. And that's tough. That's really tough, because if you're the meat in the sandwich, you'll be wondering where the lack is. The person's turning up physically, but there's no psychological input. There seems to be, there's just this psychological lack, and you're trying to work out where the lack is, and you just don't know. Well, let's look at these motorbikes. You're trying to work out where the lack is, and it's hard to comprehend and figure out. But the expenditure is in the covert emotional incest. The emotions that you're supposed to be getting are getting chewed up in the covert emotional incest. That's where it's getting chewed up. That's where it's getting taken. And you can't make up that kind of deficit. So the next thing, you're on the starvation, wondering, why can't I develop this relationship? Why can't I build this relationship? It's because of the covert emotional incest. It's solely because of the covert emotional incest. And it'll send you out of your mind, because once you go into the confusion stage, once you go into the what's going on here stage, that begins the trauma. That's the beginning of the trauma in the back of your mind, because the confusion turns into a trauma. It's paradoxical to what's healthy. That means it's a trauma. There's a trauma going on. There's something going bad here. And so this is where it's hard to come back from this, because once you go into trauma, right, psychological trauma and damage and all the rest of it from the neglect, from the covert neglect, it's hard to recover from that. It just is. How do you come back from that? And for some people, they don't. This is also a way in which you can get bound into the relationship. You can get bound into it and stuck in it and all that sort of stuff as well. Yeah. And this is where the addiction to the relationship starts, because you try harder and harder and you're not getting the result. So you try harder and harder and you're not getting the result. And that because you're trying harder and harder and you're not getting results, that turns into trauma. Complete and utter trauma. Terrible trauma. And then to try and undo that conditioning and that damage causes you to be addicted to the relationship. You end up being addicted to the relationship. And this is what happens. So the next thing, you're addicted to the relationship, and now you can't find a way out. And the abuse gets worse. It just gets worse and worse. And this is the trouble. This is the trouble, because then you can't dig your way out of it. You're trying to find your way out of it and you can't. Because you've been entrained, you've been conditioned. So while you're trying to work out what the problem is, and you can't figure out exactly what's going wrong, where the deficit is, because you don't know about covert emotional incest. Some people can go 10, 20, 30 years before they realise that they've been dealing with a dysfunctional relationship between the parent and the child. And they never come back. They never come back mentally. They never come back psychologically. They just never come back. The damage that it does to their psyche, the sense of betrayal, the sense of robbery and theft, the sense of, and this is the thing with covert emotional incest, it's such an invisible perpetrator, it's such an invisible parasite, such an invisible form of psychological damage that it'll take your life away. You won't have a fulfilled life because you won't have a fulfilled relationship. I know it sounds terrible, I know it sounds horrible, but this is the truth. And no matter how hard these people try, it's just not going to happen, because they're too connected to their children, to their DNA bond. And that's just the way it is. There's nothing you can do about it. The best thing for you to do, if you feel you're in that situation, is to abandon the relationship. Because ultimately, that's what's going to happen to you. You've already been abandoned, because they'll never fully in. So that is a form of semi-abandonment, isn't it? If somebody's not fully in the relationship, that is a form of semi-abandonment. It's not a full relationship. And this is where the damage, real deep psychological damage occurs. And these people can't work out why you get angry, and why you're trying to fix things, and why you're trying to get things. Why can't this get right? It'll never get right, because the covert emotional enmeshment the surrogacy syndrome, the enmeshment between the parent and the child will never make it right. And the problem that these people have when they lose their relationships is one will be in the relationship and the other one won't. Therefore, they'll fret for say the mother's in a relationship, the child will fret for the mother. If the child's in a relationship, the mother will fret for the child. And you've got this constant toing and throwing. I mean, their minds must be a mess. They're all medicated or on drugs or alcohol, or there's some soothing things going on. But nobody gets out of it unscathed. Nobody gets out of it unscathed. No one. If you recognize that you're in a covert emotional incestual surrogate syndrome relationship, and you've been wondering why you've been feeling the way that you do, and you're starting to suffer from confusion, brain fog, brain pain, you constantly feel emotionally starved, you feel undone, unfulfilled. The only way you can feel fulfilled with someone that is in covert emotional incest is to comply with their arrangements. If you don't comply with their arrangements, you'll be in conflict with your partner because their priority ultimately is with the covert emotional incest. And if you don't believe me, have a look at what's going on. Have a look at what's actually undermining the relationship, and you will see where your trauma is coming from, where your damage is coming from, and where your questions are coming from. The answer lies in the relationship, the extra maternal relationship between the mother and the child, the adult child, the father and the adult child, and that's where it comes undone. I've heard a couple of stories lately of men and their daughters destroying the relationships of the fathers, and the fathers allowing it. One man's had a stroke, he's in hospital. Whether it's related to that or not, but all I know is he's got no relationship and he's in hospital. And for all we know is the children want him to cark it so they can get the money out of him. You don't know. You just don't know. You don't know. And that's how it works. It'll undermine everything it can. These people will stay faithful to each other long after you're gone. They can bung on the act that they're trying to be faithful in that. But by the time they've worn you out, it's all too late for them to try and fix things. I've seen this twice now. I've seen it twice, and both times it's been devastating. Covert emotional incest. You have to identify it. You have to be honest with yourself about it. You have to call it for what it is and go, these people don't care. What happened to you? What happens to you? Number 4, you have to walk away. If there will never be a resolve. It doesn't matter if you're married to them or not. If you've identified it, you have to walk away. That's my opinion. Because I don't think you're ever going to be able to beat it. You're just not going to be able to beat it. That's how it is. Excuse me. You just have to walk away. You have to leave them alone. Let them go. You will cause too much contention. Once you're onto it, and they know, there'll never be a resolve, because there would have already been a resolve. You can explain it. You can sit down and watch videos on it. I've done all this. You can tell them how it's going to travel. You can tell them how it's going to track. You can watch the people deteriorating in front of them. You can see them trying to make a way of resolve, but there is none. And usually because they're codependent. The people that tried to escape codependency mustn't have known what it was, because they are codependent. They're codependent on each other. And this is probably the reason why you're so traumatized, because you become codependent through the trauma on the person that you're with. Through the trauma. Through the trying to make an effort to work out what the problem is. And you can't. Because the problem was there before you come along, and the problem will be there after you're gone. I've heard of stories of women who have had neurological surgery and problems with themselves, and had to go to have major brain surgery and stuff. Probably not because of the covert emotional incest, just because of life. And the husband's gone to visit the mother instead of the wife in the hospital. That's a mummy's boy. That's covert emotional incest. This woman needed a husband, and he was sitting with the mother. When you get to that stage in life and that sort of thing's happening, no, it's too late. You could be with these people for 20. This thing can lay latent. It's got a way of chameleonizing itself in with your relationship, and then when it comes out in the open, man, your life could be gone. You got to deal with it quick. You've got to deal with it real quick. And honestly, from my experience, I'm not telling you to do this. The best thing for me to do was to walk away and go no contact, because these people won't make the effort to resolve anything. They will at the start. Once you realize how bad their lives are and what the way they live, and they know you've finally realized, you'll never hear from them again. Why? Because they've got the covert emotional incest to fall back on. Right? They'll always have that to fall back on. That is their security. That is where their investment is, in the covert emotional incest, because it's a DNA hillbilly connection, as it were, if that's the right word. Monstrous enmeshment that nobody will ever beat. Just can't. This is Reverend Dr. J.W. Morrison, theologist. Bye for now.